Hello there. We'll be starting in 2 minutes. Thank you. Right. Good evening and welcome to our early years Zoom this evening. Before we start, for people who've not been on one of these calls with us before, we're going to explain some of the accessibility features on this call. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a button that says closed captions. If you press that button, you'll be able to turn on the subtitles and see a full transcript of this call that you'll be able to download. We also have Sam Riddle, who's providing BSL interpretation services for this evening, and a team of staff assisting behind the scenes. So if you need any help, put a message in the chat and someone will be able to help. Also, this event is being live streamed on social media, so please do bear in mind that. Thank you very much. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mary Bosted, the NEU Joint General Secretary. Thank you so much.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, good. Thank you, Mike, and thank you to everyone on this early years safety and funding public rally. We're delighted to see you all here. Well, I can't see you all, but I know that you're online. And we're here to shine a light on a sector which is too often ignored and forgotten, and for whom not enough is being done at the moment for the early years sector. And I tell you now, it's a sector that if we lose it, we won't get it back, and we will miss it tremendously, because it's the foundation of the beginning of a child's journey through school and into college. It's the beginning of that really important journey. Now, I used to be head of education at Kingston University, and we ran an early years course. And I used to go into early years settings to supervise students, and I would be amazed at what was done there. I'd be amazed at the quality of the support and the education provided to very young children, and the expertise of staff in developing their fine motor skills and their speech and language skills, helping them to learn how to socialize beyond their family, and helping children to play, because we know for very young children, play is really hard work, because they impose rules on themselves, which they have to obey if they want to be mother or father or a fire person or a police person. They have to impose rules on and how they behave and how they act. And so early years educators who are immensely skilled help them in all these things. And we know that particularly for children who lead whose parents are disadvantaged, who can't provide a whole range of cultural and social activities because they don't have the money to do that, early years settings are just vital for these pupils and for these young children. And the decimation of Sure Start, which was such a positive way to ensure that young children got that early years experience, we're still feeling the effects of that now, and we are the poorer for it. So our rally tonight is to raise the issue of safety in early years, and to raise the issue of funding. We've got some things that we'd like to do. The NEU would like, we've got a petition for you to sign, and we'll put that in the chat. We've got a model letter to write to your MP. We've got an online link for the letter you can write to your MP about the importance of early years, about funding and about safety. And we've got an ability to tweet to your MP also. So we'll be putting all those in the chat. We've got a hashtag for Twitter, which is a hashtag Make Early Years Safe. So that if you're going to tweet, tweet using that. And we've got the handles are NEU Union, Unison the Union, NEHT News, Early Years Ed underscore UK, and the APPG Early Years. So if you're going to tweet, then those are the handles, and the hashtag is make early years safe. We have a really excellent lineup of speakers. We've got quite a lot of them. There's a lot to say. So I'm going to be really strict and say to your speakers, I've got a stopwatch. You get your stopwatch. I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and then we have to move on to the next speaker. So make sure you make your main points and get your main message out to the audience. And to start with, I am delighted to welcome Tulip Siddiqui, who is a Labour MP and Shadow Minister for Education. Tulip, you're very welcome, and we're really looking forward to what you have to say.
Thanks very much, Mary. And it's a real privilege to speak to you today as Shadow Minister for Children and Early Years. I want to say a big thank you to the NEU, Unison, NAHT, and everyone else who's been involved in organising this rally, and for inviting me to speak, and for all the fantastic work you're doing to stand up for early years workers at this very difficult time. And also, Mary, thank you to you and the organisers for accommodating me first. You may know that the reason why I'm speaking a bit earlier is because I have to put my 2 very small children to bed. So I'm sleeping and breathing the early years at the moment.
Yeah.
It used to be that the early years was always an afterthought for this government, and that the minister's carelessness and underfunding was fueling a steady decline of the sector. And the truth is that during this pandemic, early years workers and the fantastic services you've provided hasn't even been an afterthought. You've been completely ignored from start to finish. And I think all of you have realized that, and I feel very bad about it, because I know what the valuable service that you've been providing for my own children, but for the rest of the country. And at no point has this been made more clear than during this 3rd national lockdown. You've once again been asked to provide an emergency service for families at a time when COVID cases, hospitalizations and deaths were soaring across the country. And the government have asked you to do this. They didn't even have the decency to give you the scientific evidence for why this was safe, and they still haven't. I've continuously asked for it in Parliament, and I still haven't seen the scientific evidence for why this is safe and why nurseries should stay open. To add insult to injury, the vast majority of early years workers haven't even been offered the same access to mass testing as school staff. And you, as you all know too well, staff in PVI settings are being forced to travel many miles to walk-in testing centres, some of which are only open for the window in which they're supposed to be working. It makes no sense to exclude any nurseries from the mass rollout of home testing kits. And the decision to do so causes more worry, and is just another example in a long list of ways that early years providers have been excluded from funding and support throughout this pandemic. I really believe that we need a proper safety plan for early years staff. This means proper access to mass testing and a plan for rolling out vaccinations to you and other key workers once we've vaccinated the most vulnerable groups. And as Shadow Early Years Minister, I know you're working day in, day out in settings where social distancing is impossible. And I will be there for you, making the case for your safety at every opportunity. No worker should have to go into a workplace where they feel unsafe, but I do feel the government is financially punishing providers that have felt they needed to take the difficult decision to close or limit their attendance on grounds of safety. And for some reason, ministers have chosen this month, the height of the pandemic, to pull the rug under the feet of the sector by scrapping pre-COVID levels of funding. And research shows that a quarter of nurseries, preschools and childminders could go bust before summer at the current levels of funding. And the response of ministers seems to be to shrug their shoulders and hope for the best. Having asked you to keep working at full capacity during lockdown without the reassurance of safety measures you so clearly need and deserve, the government is essentially saying that they aren't willing to provide the funding needed to ensure that you won't lose your job at the end of it. This is no way to treat staff who are working tirelessly to keep children learning and keeping our economy going. So I will keep fighting for your safety and for your jobs. I will keep fighting to rebuild a better future for the early years sector when all this is over, one where we as a society recognise how crucial the early years and childcare you provide is. So we reward you properly for it. We give you the recognition you deserve, and we give providers sustainable funding so you aren't constantly living under the threat of losing your job. So thanks for listening to me. I feel passionate about this issue. I am on your side, and I'll be making the case over and over in Parliament. So I'll hand back to Mary and the other line of fantastic speakers we have coming up today.
Thank you, Tulip. And I know how hard you are working in the House of Commons to advance the cause and to make the case for early years and the sector and the people working within it, and its importance to parents and to the most vulnerable and the youngest children. So thank you, and good luck in getting your children to bed. It was always a difficult time of day, if I remember rightly. And now I'd like to move to welcoming Caroline Lucas MP, MP for Brighton from the Green Party. Caroline, you're very, very welcome on this NEU call, and we're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say about early years and about fighting for this such a vital sector.
Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you as well for accommodating me quite early in your running order too. I can't say that I've got kids to go and look after, but I do have another meeting to go to. But I am delighted to have the opportunity to say a few words at this really important meeting. And I want to bring with me thanks as well from the whole of the Green Party, to the NEU, the NAHT, to Unison, and to everyone who continues to work in our schools and our early year settings so hard and doing so much on behalf of us all. We know that so much is being asked of you and that the challenges you face are enormous. And we also know how badly you're being let down by this government. We have had mind-boggling ineptitude from Gavin Williamson. We've had utter incredulity from the Prime Minister that anyone might dare to question his government's incompetent approach. And we have Matt Hancock, who is always at least one step behind unfolding events. And it is unforgivable. Independent Sage warned some time ago of the importance of nurseries being included alongside schools in plans to control the virus. And yet the government always thought they knew best. And now experts like UCL's Anthony Costello from iSage, even the Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, have made really clear that keeping children in nurseries indiscriminately is a bad idea. And yet still the government is refusing to listen, and their inaction is putting your staff and children and families at risk. The government should be investing in early years with emergency funding to meet COVID-related costs, a funding settlement that puts the sector on a sustainable and secure footing for the future, and a sector-led recovery plan. And yet, instead of that, it feels sometimes like ministers are intent on undermining early years provision. And this reached a climax last month with the annual census of early year settings, which, as you know, is used to calculate future early years entitlement. It beggars belief that this exercise, this census, was carried out in the midst of a global pandemic, when current and predicted numbers are fluctuating so much. But to add insult to injury, as you know, the government then changed its guidance at the very last minute. And these new rules prevented local authorities from counting any children's places that were temporarily unavailable during census week because providers had closed, other than to vulnerable or those of vulnerable children or those of critical workers. And basically by doing that, they were penalizing any local authority that had decided to protect its employees, any local authority that was watching their local case numbers and taking a precautionary evidence-based approach, like my own authority here in Brighton and Hove. Essentially, the government was forcing them to choose between doing the right thing and then being denied the proper funding entitlement for some of our most disadvantaged children. And this will have a profound effect on funding allocations for local authorities from Brighton to Liverpool, from Hounslow to Newcastle. Now, all are stretched beyond their limits already. And this is nothing less than an attack on their ability to give local children the best possible start in life. This is about our children's futures, and it's about people's lives here and now too. It's about their safety at work, your safety at work. It's about morale. It's about the right to fair treatment, both in maintained nurseries and in privately run ones as well. So as well as actively challenging ministers on their disgraceful approach to early years funding, and as well as demanding access to mass testing for nursery providers now, I'm also demanding parity with schools on this whole question of remaining open. There is no scientific evidence that we have seen for anything else. The NEU and others report that case rates for nursery-aged children in England are in line with those for primary-aged children. So I can't see that there is any justifiable rationale for treating them differently. And if Matt Hancock is still really worried about covering the wages of parents who can't be expected to juggle looking after small children with working from home, I have this simple message for him. Extend the furlough scheme, make early years safe, and save the early years sector. And whilst you're at it, please sort out PPE and testing. You've had 10 months now, and frontline workers in education and other settings still aren't getting all the protection that they deserve. So in conclusion, early years really matters. It's part of our communities and the foundations of the fairer future that we know is possible. I am pleased and honoured to stand in solidarity with all of you to ensure not just the sector's survival, but the chance for it to really flourish so that our young people can also do the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline, for that excellent speech about the situation, in particular, the iniquities of the funding situation for the sector. I'm now really pleased to welcome Daisy Cooper, MP, who's the spokesperson for the Liberal Democrats on education. Daisy, it's always great to work with you, and it's great to see you at this rally. So thank you, and we're really looking forward to what you've got to say.
Thank you, Mary. I'm going to go back before the pandemic to the general election, because the general election, the last one, was only 14 months ago. And as a political activist, general elections are really exciting because you get to set out your vision of a country, what's important to you, what your priorities are. You get to fire up the imagination. And as Liberal Democrats, we had childcare front and centre of our plans. We had big plans to increase investment from 4 billion up to about 13 billion by 2024. We wanted to put another billion into Sure Start centres. We wanted to put so much backing into childcare and early years because we know how important it is to support children's development and to help parents. And it was such an exciting time to be able to put those ideas out there and talk about how important childcare is for the future of this country. And then just 2 or 3 months later, along came the pandemic. And of course, the whole early years child care sector was already stretched and then heartbreakingly was pushed to breaking point. And I know from the people in my constituency how frustrating it has been to feel not listened to at all by this government, to be constantly having to send email after email after email and feeling like the government just isn't listening. But we do hear you as Liberal Democrats, and we are speaking up for you. Since March of last year, I have personally done 7 written questions for early years settings and sent 2 letters. That's on average once a month, raising this issue with the government. And we have continued to push the case that we need a long-term settlement that is fair and that will continue to support the childcare sector for years to come. These short bursts of announcements just aren't good enough, and we do need to have that long-term plan. But in addition to that, I have heard your concerns about safety, and like several others, I have quizzed the government on this. Most recently, in January of this year, so just a few days ago, I tabled a question to the government asking them about the advice that they were relying on, because the government continues to say that they believe that childcare settings are one of the safer settings on account of there being fewer transmissions. And so I asked them to publish the evidence behind that. And in the very long answer they provided, they actually directed me towards modelling that had been done previously. When I looked at the dates of that modelling, the modelling had in fact been presented to SAGE on the 30th of April last year and had been published online on the 8th of May. So I have submitted another question asking when there will be new modelling provided based on the new variant. And I got the answer just a few minutes actually before coming on the call. And it's not clear that it's basically the government hasn't said when they're going to have that new modelling ready. So there isn't an answer. It suggests that there isn't any modelling on the new variant, but the government continues to insist that childcare and early years education can't be done remotely. They continue to insist that it is low risk. And from my point of view, Liberal Democrats have said throughout the crisis we'll be led by the science. What we are demanding is transparency. We are demanding transparency on the evidence and the advice that they've been given. And it does often seem quite difficult to get those answers from the government. So I agree with what others have said. We need a plan to keep all schools and all early year settings safe. We need to see the rollout of the mass testing kits. We need a long-term financial settlement, and Liberal Democrats will continue to keep fighting, not just to keep the sector going, but to really invest in childcare, because for us, it's absolutely front and centre of what we want to see in this country. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Daisy. It's a fantastic speech and absolutely the time as well. That's just fantastic. So now we've got Jack Drone, the MP from the Labour Party, and Jack is chair of the All-Parliamentary Group for Nursery Schools, Nursery and Receptions classes. And he's a great campaigner, advocate and stalwart for early years, both in his own constituency and nationally as well. It's been a key interest of Jack's for a long time, and he's been a tireless campaigner for the sector. So, Jack, we are delighted that you're here at this joint union rally, and we're really looking forward to what you have to say.
Thank you very much, Mary. I'm the Member of Parliament for Erdington, and I always say about Erdington, it may be rich in talent, but it's one of the poorest constituencies in the country. We are blessed with 4 excellent nursery schools: Castle Vale, Osborne, Featherstone and Marsh Hill. And I'm proud to say that the national campaign to save those nursery schools from closure back 4 years ago, faced with the new funding formula, commenced in Castle Vale in my constituency. It then rolled it out across the constituency. Head teachers out taking petitions in with teddy bear suits, and thousands signed, thousands became involved. We then rolled it out Birmingham-wide. We then rolled it out nationwide. And we formed the all-party group with the biggest attendance in the history of all-party groups in the House of Commons. 600 people attended it. As a consequence of that, what we had was the unions coming together with parents, the mobilisation of parent power, putting pressure on members of Parliament all across the country, as a consequence of which we won that supplementary funding. We did not win secure long-term funding, but what we did, and 3 years subsequently, we have kept the government's nose to the grindstone in terms of the immediate funding necessary for nursery schools. The problem is, I'll come to say in a moment, that we don't have a long-term solution on the one hand, but on the other hand, now what we've got is mounting costs, greater costs, greater demand, and at a time of crisis, increasingly nursery schools are closing, and there might be wholesale closures at the next stages, and that would be an absolute tragedy. All of us on this call, in this meeting, have seen just how powerful the nursery schools are in terms of what they do. They are a rock in terrible times. And over the years, it warms the cockles of your heart to see from the nursery schools just the difference that they make. More recently, with Sally Lease at the Castle Vale School, I remember seeing a group of 2- and 3-year-olds who had special needs. And the PVIs could no longer cater for them. So they would have been left and their parents bereft had it not been for the nursery schools standing in. I've seen parents and grandparents wax lyrical, glow with pride about how their kids and grandkids have flourished as a consequence of going to a nursery school. I always remember one granddad, I almost had tears in his eyes, saying about how my grandson, Jack, he couldn't string 2 words together. 2 years on to going to that nursery school, we couldn't shut him up. I also, more recently, I remember 2 mums, again in the Castle Vale Nursery School. They had been in isolation last year, social isolation. They had become completely desperate. And what they did was they turned to the nursery school, and the nursery school helped them at their time of need. Now those 2 mums, 2 excellent women, are volunteers in the Castle Vale Nursery School. So all of us can see from our own experience just how important our nursery schools are. And the lessons of history from back 4 years ago is this: we have to organise, mobilise members of Parliament, parents and grandparents all over the country to pile the pressure on the government running up to the budget later on in 4 weeks' time. It matters. It matters for the kids who get the best possible start in life from our nursery schools. It matters for their parents and their grandparents. It matters for the life chances of a whole generation, because what you do in those early years is key as to whether or not children will then grow up and flourish in their later years. It matters to the health and well-being of children. It matters also in terms of cost to the public purse, because a failure to act in early years stores up additional costs down the line. And it matters, and I say this to Boris Johnson, if you mean what you say about wanting to level up, then to allow nursery school after nursery school to close would be completely to point in the opposite direction. If to level up, you need to give all kids, particularly from a deprived background, the best possible start in life. So they are the jewels in the crown of early years provision. Crucially, therefore, in the 4 weeks ahead of us, it is about that mobilization of parent power, of members of parliament. And I would urge all those on this call, be they from the unions or be they parents, to come together, work together, to say to members of parliament in the clearest possible terms, what we want you to do is to act now. To act now because a rescue package is necessary given the mounting problems, and to act now because we need secure, long-term funding for our nursery schools. They are the jewels in the crown of early years provision, and we must preserve them and build upon them at the next stages.
Thank you so much, Jack. And can I remind everybody on this call that we're asking you to sign our petition about making early years safe and funded. The more people we can get to sign that, the more signatures, the more the government will have to take notice. Write to your MP using the model letter that we've provided, and tweet using the using the hashtag make early years safe. Really to start to increase the noise. So I've been looking at the chat. Some people saying that people don't listen to the early years, concerns about safety. And so we have to ensure that the politicians do listen. As I said before, if this sector goes, we won't get it back. And parents and young children absolutely need this sector. So we'll move on now. I'm delighted Paul Whiteman, General Secretary of the NEHT, is here to talk to us. I've got Paul, funding confusion and chaos for head teachers and safety. So all those things in 5 minutes. I'm really pleased that you're here and we're looking forward to your contribution.
Mary, I'll do my very best, and I can save some time. It's always difficult to follow Jack, who's such a passionate advocate for early years and sets the case, so I don't need to set that case again, but I'll start with safety. And the government simply fails to make its case. We need more leadership from government about what it's asking you to do and why it's asking you to do it. It's not good enough in a crisis to simply assert things. You have to explain the basis upon which you say why you've made policy decisions and why you want to take things forward. You have to do more than command. You have to do more than assert. During a crisis, you need to set a sense of mission. And I don't have a clear understanding of what it is the government is asking you to do in early years other than keep the gates open. What's the purpose for treating you differently to how colleagues down the corridor in reception class are being treated, or in a different school setting are being treated? There's no explanation of mission, and there's no explanation as to why they've made the policy decision that they have. So my appeal to government is set that mission. Let us understand what it is you're being asked to do. Why is it different? Once you've explained why, you need to acknowledge and quantify the risk that people are being asked to take. And, you know, I get so frustrated where sections of the media somehow try to paint trade unions as stoppers or standing in the way of schools functioning or schools opening. We have an absolutely legitimate interest in your safety. That's why we exist. Of course, we're supposed to ask questions of support. Of course, we're supposed to make it difficult for government to account for their decisions. That's what keeps you safe. You have to acknowledge that risk, quantify that risk, and then work with us to mitigate that risk. We have an absolutely legitimate role in sitting down with government and understanding the science that they rely upon, questioning that science, and then understanding what mitigations are in place to make sure that you're as safe as you can be. And no one is pretending that a return to school can be absolutely safe in the middle of a pandemic. But what we do have to do is acknowledge the risk and make it an acceptable level of risk rather than being reckless with your lives. So that's really, really, really difficult. No one's explained to me yet that there's confident science around the transfer of the virus from children to adults. So simply asserting that young children deal with the virus better than older people deal with it isn't enough. What's their function in transfer to adults in school and transfer to adults in the community? That at the very least needs to be explained so that we can get our heads around some of the measures that need to be taken in school, because the very basic measures, all of the measures that the rest of community are being asked to take, such as social distancing, really good ventilation, time apart, you can't achieve in early year settings. So there's a lot to do on safety, and the government hasn't made its case at all, and it needs to step forward and really assert and really compel us to understand why it says what it does. And then on funding, Jack's made the case about long-term funding, but let's be clear, right now we're not asking for any more than was in the budget. We need a longer-term funding settlement. We've made that case time and time before, but the money that you're trying to get reassurance about right now is money that's already in the budget. So what's the problem? And taking a census in the middle of a pandemic is just ludicrous. There's no point in doing that at all. And our survey, the early results from our survey with members at the moment asking what the returns were, means that the census is an absolute sham. And if you rely upon that to make any decisions, that will be reckless too. So that's been impossible for head teachers and school leaders, where actually they were being invited to put safety at risk just to guarantee their funding going forward. Head teachers should never be in that position. So my overall appeal, trying to cover all of that in the confusion and chaos in 5 minutes, Mary, is that what we need to do is do what I haven't done, slow for a moment, really assess what's going on, really assess the level of risk. Is that acceptable in the circumstances under which we work? And if it is, step that out so that we can go forward and support the families that are so very important to all of us.
That's fantastic, Paul. A fantastic summary of what unions are about and why we're so involved in this campaign, and also around the issues of safety and funding. So thank you so much for that. Now I'm delighted to introduce Bistrix Merrick, who is from Early Education, who is going to talk to us about concerns across the sector around funding on whatever you want to talk about, Beatrice, in the 5 minutes that you have available.
Thank you, Mary, and thanks to all my predecessor speakers. And I'd re-echo those key issues about safety. Our members are telling us that safety is absolutely at the top of their concerns. I can see that from the comments in the chat and on social media. Government has really got this wrong. They've absolutely got to prioritise the sector for testing, for vaccination, and they've got to review the decision about full opening of the sector. If it's safe, show us the evidence. If the evidence isn't there, rethink. That's not an unreasonable ask of government, and we've got to keep that message going loud and clear. We need the sector. We need the earlier sector for the reasons people have said about giving every child the best start in life and about allowing parents to keep working. We're only going to have a sector still standing at the end of this if government takes another look at funding. We know that there have been additional costs. Settings across the sector have worked really hard to make their provision as safe as possible. So that might mean adaptation to buildings, extra sinks, extra cleaning, all those kind of things that we know that people have done. They didn't have any extra grants, unlike the school sector where there was some extra funding, nowhere near enough, but some extra funding for COVID costs. The early years sector has had nothing. They've had the bulk funding for the early entitlements, whether or not children were in, and they've had the option of furlough. Some settings have had rates rebates, but that's not been universal. So while settings are continuing to have all their usual costs, losing massive amounts of fee income and having to face additionally huge challenges with keeping staffing adequate at times when they are open, there has been minimal support from government, or certainly not sufficient. The sector urgently needs a rescue package, a recovery package, to make sure that it's still standing, that it's still open by the time we finally come out the other end of the pandemic. We need also a huge review of the whole funding system for the early years. The reason that everything is so dire at the moment is the system has been chronically underfunded for years. And so we do need those basic funding rates to be reviewed. And then, as Jack said, and the campaign that most of you will know early education has been integrally involved in, we have a very specific issue around the funding for maintained nursery schools who didn't get a settlement along a permanent settlement 4 years ago when the new funding formula was introduced, have been living hand to mouth year by year, term by term, without the ability to plan. Now, as deficits build up, settings are having to put recovery plans in place without having certainty about their future funding model, knowing current funding is inadequate. So we call on the government to look at the funding across the board, to look at how you make the whole sector viable. Government is very fond of putting more money into the early years for more places and saying to the public, oh look, we're funding more and more places. But that's no good if the system creaks at the seams and just is at the stage where it simply can't take more children. We have the potential to lose so many settings. All the surveys show us that we are in danger of losing many, many settings and providers right across the sector, but as ever, particularly in areas of disadvantage, in those areas where children and parents most need high quality settings to give them that best start in life. So we would urge you, write to your MP, mobilise your parents to write to your MP. We've got to make the sector's voices heard. Don't let us be ignored any longer. Let's make our voices loud and clear.
Thank you, Beatrice, and really emphasising that point that we have to use the abilities we've got to make our voices heard. Sign the petition, write to your MP, tweet about tonight's rally. That will be, and try and get an appointment with your MP to talk about the issues that we're raising here. You know yourselves, no one's more of an expert on early years than the people on this call. You know what your settings need. You know what the funding situation is. You know what the health and safety situation is. And so have confidence, you know far more than the MP, and make sure that they're listening to you. So now I'm delighted to welcome John Richards, who's Head of Education at Unison. John, it's really great to see you, and we're really looking forward to what you have to say on behalf of many of your members who will be early years practitioners.
Thanks, Mary, and it's always a great pleasure to be working with you and some of the other colleagues who've already spoken and will speak in a minute. So, as you said, I'm John Richards, National Secretary for Education for Unison, the largest union for nursery and early years workers, and I'm going to focus on current risks to staff. And the government are sending us mixed messages. They say they want to stop the community spread, but they only partially closed education settings and left early years specific settings open. They say that early years staff are essential, yet their actions suggest that early years staff are disposable and could be placed at risk. We know that early years rightly and understandably have fears for their safety and families at the moment. Their staff have told us big concerns about social distancing, overcrowded bubbles, on average 16 plus, and lack of personal protective equipment. So it's hardly surprising that we've seen the big increases we have seen in recent weeks. The last Ofsted figures showing 1,200 in the last figures they showed. And Tulip and Paul have already said we're still waiting to get the scientific evidence to justify the differential treatment between early years and nurseries and schools. The evidence seems to be that children are less at risk at getting ill. But crucially for us, there's just not enough evidence to say for sure if young children spread the virus less than other children or to adults. And the DfE doesn't seem to take into account that staff mix with each other and with parents. It's always about the children. And as we know, you can't run a nursery with children alone. You've got to have the staff to actually look after them. So we say, until we're certain early years settings are safe, they should be treated the same as schools. And until we see the scientific evidence that show they're safe, nurseries and early years settings should be treated the same as schools. The DfE says that early years are the most critical phase. But in that case, why has early years been less well funded over the years and under COVID? Had no help with extra cleaning, no additional funding for personal protective equipment, not being given that same access to testing, and not mentioned when vaccines are being talked about. And Unison in particular has concerns about staff in the private sector. No guarantee of full pay of isolating or showing symptoms. No tests being sent to settings, staff having to go rely on community facilities. A lack of protection for clinically vulnerable and clinically extremely vulnerable staff, a particular issue in the private and voluntary sector. So our message is, Early years is a critical phase of child development. Yes, we're as keen as anyone that children should be in early years settings, but staff and children need to be in a safe environment. And that means we need clear restrictions and enforcement in bubble size, a maximum is 8, as we were talking about last June, a recognition of the problems of social distancing, and the opportunity for staff to wear face coverings. The same access to testing and vaccine as other education staff. A fair funding system that doesn't compromise staff safety. Guaranteed full pay for any early years member of staff required to isolate, and protection for all clinically vulnerable and clinically extremely vulnerable staff. And as Mary says, sign the petition, get involved, actively campaign with us. And we want to say to the government, listen to us, take on board the worries of our members and early years staff, and please address the problems that we face and address the concerns that we people have. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, John. Really, really the important message about getting involved. Now I'd like to welcome Elizabeth Davies, who's a parent, Newcastle Underline, and she wants, I've got here, Elizabeth, you can talk about what you want, but you're going to be talking about the safety concerns of parents for staff and families and their community. So we're delighted to have you here. It's great that we've got a parent here giving your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be able to share a parent's viewpoint. I have 11-year-old twins and an almost 4-year-old who attends a local maintained nursery. As parents, we strive to give our children the best start in life, and based on this, we chose to send our son to nursery every morning for his preschool year. We wanted to give him the opportunity to start his learning journey in an enjoyable, safe and sociable way, and we felt that this was the best way to prepare him for his transition to infant school. During the weekend of January the 2nd, we were carefully following the news, the guidelines that the NEU were issuing, and our gut feeling that education settings would not be safe places with the predicted Christmas wave on the horizon. Based on the government's handling of this pandemic, we had no faith in Gavin Williamson and Boris Johnson's assurances that schools were safe. We made the difficult decision not to send our children back to school on the first Monday of term, as we felt there was likely to be another U-turn, and risking exposing them to the virus for just one day seemed like madness. We felt very fortunate to be in a position to make that choice, and know that many parents have been forced to make impossible decisions, caught between work needs and the safety of their families. The government have not only put settings in an impossible position, but parents too, when a lack of furlough pay means that many have to compromise on safety. Thankfully, when we explained our feelings to nursery, they were really supportive of our choices. We were shocked and horrified when later that day we heard that all education settings would be closing to most, yet nurseries and early years providers would remain open to all. Do under fives not spread the virus? Are early years practitioners immune to the disease? Are there no vulnerable staff, children or families in these settings? The national lockdown and raising the alert level to 5 aimed to reduce the infection rates and fatalities, yet nurseries remained open to all children. Why is this? It seems completely counterproductive. I'm disgusted that the government cares so little for the safety of our children. Surely by keeping nurseries open to all, it provides a potential point of infection, as children and staff could take the virus home to their families and out into the wider community. We would much rather our children were in school and nursery, not just for their academic education, as I feel sure that they will catch up as time goes on, but for their mental health and social well-being. The government have let this situation become so dangerous with their inaction and delays that to continue to have large groups of young children mixing could prove devastating for the wider community. I have no doubt that my son's nursery and other settings are striving to keep everyone as safe as possible with the highest level of precautions and safety measures. But anyone who has spent time with a small child knows that social distancing is completely impossible. We are therefore choosing to keep our son at home for the foreseeable future, to keep him safe, to keep us safe, to keep the nursery staff and their families safe, and ultimately the wider community and the NHS safe. We strongly feel that the government has let down ordinary people by keeping early years settings open. They certainly haven't chosen to put the health and safety of local communities first. Until the government can put actions in place to drive down community rates and proper funding and support to allow children to return safely, then nurseries should be open on the same basis as schools for vulnerable and key worker children only. I believe the government has a duty of care to the nation to protect the nation, and by keeping early years settings open to all, they are failing in this. I therefore would call on the government to do what is right, keep nurseries safe and fund them properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was such a powerful, powerful plea for safety and for the sector. And it's so great to hear from a parent supporting it so strongly. That is a fantastic contribution to this rally. Thank you so much. Now, the next speaker, I'm delighted to have Sally Lees, who's a nursery school head teacher. She's a member of the NEHT and she's from Birmingham. And Sally, we're really, really pleased to hear from you as a head teacher in the sector about the issues that you're facing, because no one could be better at telling us what those issues really are than you. So welcome.
Thank you so much for allowing me to do that, but wow, how do I follow Elizabeth? I'm not really sure I can, but I will give it my best shot. I'd just like to say thank you to the unions and all the MPs, including my MP, Jack Dromey, who you heard is very passionate, and for their support and early education, for the support for the whole of the early years sector. And I think one thing this has done is brought the early years sector together, facing what we have to face as a community. And I will not try to speak on behalf of an entire sector. I can't. We've got some shared experiences, but there'll be very many individual experiences that I can't touch upon. But I hope that I can give a bit of a view from the workforce, from the coalface, having to put this guidance into practice, having to try and balance the safety and the needs of our children to the best of our ability. And so please bear with me, and I hope I do it justice. And my start would be about reflecting on my amazing, humbling staff who from the very start of this have been passionate, committed, brave, and have worked the best they can for the needs of the children. And I know that all of you will have that same experience. And on the 4th of January, we met together in the face of the new variant to review our risk assessment. And they said, Sally, we need to be here for the children. What we just need to do is do what we do better, stick to the risk assessment, wash our hands, be very diligent and just be on it, they said. And we're willing, we're here, we will do it. And then later that day, our Prime Minister made an announcement and just dismissed an entire workforce, an entire sector with no explanation whatsoever, making them feel worth less than other sectors, other workforces in the education and childcare system. And it felt like a punch to the gut. And all I could feel was, how do I face my work team tomorrow? And I'm sure all of you felt the same. I was heartbroken for the entire sector and anybody who was made to feel worth less than any other members of staff in other sectors. And I didn't know what I'd face the next day. Anxieties, concerns, anger, union letters, who knew? But I faced an entire work team happy to come, happy to work with children and hoping that some children would come. And I thought, I need to follow my work team. I need to follow my staff. So I tried not to feel that a decision that affected the well-being of children, families and staff and their children and families was based purely on economic decisions. I thought, no, be positive. So I listened to what the government said. And I'll paraphrase a bit because you've all heard this, but DfE said keeping nurseries and childminders open will support parents and deliver crucial care and education for our youngest children. Gavin Williamson said, so when you're in a position to keep part of the education system open in the early years, I believe it's the right decision to make because so many families rely on that nursery provision. Those nursery years are so important. Early years settings remain open nationally to all, providing vital early education and childcare. And Boris Johnson said that there were very, very important reasons to keep early years provision open. So I heard from that us, early years as a whole, are crucial, vital, and very, very important. So I feel some optimism. Of course, we're open, fully open as a sector and doing our best because we're crucial, vital, and very, very important. And what we do for children and families is crucial, vital, and very, very important. That's why we're one of the only parts of the education sector that is fully open in a worldwide pandemic, because we're crucial, vital, and very, very important. So I feel optimistic that when this is all over, that we will have a new approach from our government and a new conversation, because you can't continue to underfund the most crucial, vital, and very, very important part of your education and childcare system. You can't continue to undermine the principles and the workforce of your most crucial, vital, and very, very important part of the education and childcare system. And obviously, they'll prioritise the vaccination of the most crucial, vital, and very, very important workforce in their education and childcare system. They'll have to support, properly fund and promote the most crucial, vital, and very, very important part of their system. That's their words. That's them. So I look forward to working with them on providing crucial, vital, and very, very important provision to our children and families. And so if anything you can take from this period and give back to your staff is how crucial, vital, and very, very important they are, and what we do is.
Sally, that is just so powerful. And your words, crucial, vital, and very, very important. Yes, let's take the government at its own words and let's use those words. I've made a note of them. Let's use those words in what they do next and remind them of it at every point. Thank you so much for your such a powerful testimony this evening. And now I'd like to introduce Julie Forgan. Julie is a Unison member from York, and she works in the sector. And Julie, we're delighted to have you on the call and really looking forward to what you have to say.
Thanks very much. Yes, I work in the nursery class in a school as a member of the support staff, and I'm also the Unison rep. When the government announced the lockdown on the first Monday evening of term, staff at my school were relieved. The day before, we'd put in a Section 44 letter declaring our workplace unsafe, collectively signed by support staff and teachers, and our school had already told parents that weekend that we wouldn't be fully opening. Staff had been very nervous about doing this, but the cases were soaring in our area and they felt vindicated when the government decision eventually came. But that feeling was very short-lived for the nursery staff. We were completely dismayed when we realised it didn't apply to us. It made no sense. Ordinarily, we can have 39 3- and 4-year-olds in any one session, but because children attend on different days, we work with many more families than that. Nursery classes are often the busiest in a school because of split sessions. We share our outdoor space with a reception class, and only a door separates us indoors. We work as an early years team. How could it be that the children 1 day older in our reception class were not safe to come in, but our nursery children were? Our children are the least able in school to comply with the COVID secure guidance. They've become absolutely brilliant at washing their hands and know how to go in between their fingers and put their hands over each other. Early years children love water after all, but as is developmentally appropriate, 1 minute after they've washed them, they will have their hands in their mouth or in someone else's. They can't socially distance. Their learning is done through play with each other. If they fall, they rely on us to pick them up. They need their nappies changing, they need their faces wiping, they need help with feeding. They often cough or sneeze in your face. We are the only workplace setting I know where we are fully expected not to wear masks or socially distance. The recent data that shows nurseries as the location of COVID outbreaks second only to supermarkets is no surprise to nursery workers. There is palpable anger and fear across the sector at being treated like a babysitting service to keep the economy going. Profit is put ahead of people. As support workers, we are up to 7 times more likely to catch COVID. No wonder then that the Early Years Alliance survey says that 1/5 of staff are considering leaving. Added to this is the funding crisis. My nursery is only attended by key worker and vulnerable children, as staff maintain the Section 44 letter. We have yet to see how that will play out with our funding for this year, but we could lose tens of thousands of pounds, something no school can afford. In the private, voluntary and independent sector, the funding threat is even greater. Many face a choice to fully open or go under. That's no choice, it's immoral. A PVI nursery near ours that is fully open had 11 staff members and 4 children test positive a couple of weeks ago. A key argument that the government uses to keep us open is that we are of prime value to children developmentally. We agree with them there. But if that's true, fund us properly and don't watch setting after setting at the heart of our communities fall apart and collapse. We have to fight collectively for full funding and stand with all our settings. And it's crucial that more nursery workers join unions. We are in touch with all our families who are not attending via online portals or the phone. We really miss them all. We know it is really difficult and many are struggling. We also recognise how much they've been failed by the government's inability to provide adequate resources and by employers refusing to furlough parents who are homeschooling. It's brilliant to be at a meeting like this, where our unions are working collaboratively. Trade unions need to do more of this. I've been very proud to be an education worker, as our unions have stood up to the government and forced U-turns to protect members. Other unions need to join this resistance. Firstly, as there are many unsafe workplaces with massive COVID outbreaks, often doing non-essential work, which increases the numbers having to attend our schools and leads to unsafe bubble sizes. And secondly, because I've no doubt that the government is going to try and make us all pay for the economic crisis that is coming. We need to fight together to stop this.
That was fantastic, Julie. Thank you for that heartfelt and passionate and forthright speech about your experiences and the experience of support staff workers within the early years sector. I've seen the reaction in the chat, absolutely raising so many points. And I think the quality of the speeches in this rally and the quality of perspectives have been excellent, absolutely brilliant. And the last speaker is Lucy Cox, who's a teacher, and she's an SEND specialist and an NEU member from London. So Lucy, thanks for being an NEU member. I'm really pleased to hear your voice on this rally. And in this case, last, Lucy, is definitely not least.
Thank you very much, Mary. It's lovely to be here with all the other people who agree with me about how important early years education is. And like Mary said, I'm a special needs teacher. I'm a SENCO in 2 nursery schools in northwest London, in a very, very deprived area that's been hit enormously hard by the virus. I mean, trying to give you a bit of a picture of what it was like by June. Actually, the area in which one of the 2 nurseries I work in was the area that had the most deaths in the country, just in our little ward. So we'd seen hundreds and hundreds of deaths at that point, and you can imagine how hard that hit our staff, because we're very much part of the community. I live in the community, as do most of the staff. That we'd already at that point had 26 people who who'd suffered from COVID. Now we've come to a point where we've had so many staff that have suffered from COVID that 9 of us, myself included, had it twice. We're really going for it. So that's quite a shocking kind of situation that we're being put in. And yet at the same time, sometimes I feel like I'm kind of being gaslit by an abuser when I hear the stay-at-home message from the government, usually when I'm going to or from work. And as people have said, to a workplace where we're not encouraged to use PPE, where actually it's a decision that government has tried to stop us using it, where we know we're working with children, and particularly when you're working with children with special needs, then you're not in a position both that you can distance from them, but also these children need personal care, and we have to be able to give them a cuddle, we have to change their nappies, etc., and help them eat and all those things. And actually that's why a lot of the time we've been hit very hard. I think talking about special needs, nursery schools are essential for children with special needs. We do the early identification, we teach those early self-care skills, we get language going, but actually what we've seen over the last few years is a double whammy in so many different ways, because actually the underfunding of early years disincentivizes early years settings, whether they're big nursery schools like where I work or childminders, from taking those children with special educational needs, because actually we know we're not funded at a level where we can really support them properly, where we can staff the level of support that they need. And actually that's increasingly a problem, so that those children end up either not accessing education, so not being ready for school, which is what the government, is saying is the aim of early years education. I mean, I want to rebut a little bit this idea that for us in early years it's about getting children school ready, because I think we are a sector in our own right. It is a stage of learning and development in our own right. In fact, we all know as early years educators that children are learning faster now in the years before they're 5 than they will do at any other time in their life. And that means that what all of us do, like I say, whether you're working in a PVI or you're a childminder or you work in a nursery school, we are all educators. We are not there to babysit. We are not childcare. You know, that the government is treating us like that, but that isn't what we are. We all have high levels of skill. We are educators, and just in the same way that teachers are right the way through the education sector. And I think that's really important. We remember that. And really, we also all know that the concerns that we're being told about children being at home during the pandemic, and we know some of our families have chosen to keep their children at home because of their fears and worries about the virus, and quite naturally. And there are all these concerns about what's happening to them at home, and they're missing out on education, are legitimate. But actually, those aren't new things. All of us know that before the pandemic started, we've had years and years of both underfunding for education, but also austerity, which has driven those families deeper and deeper into poverty, real poverty. And that's families who are working as well as families on benefits. I can't tell you how many home visits I've done. The whole family's living in one room, where I've gone on home visits and actually had to push past people smoking crack on the staircase of my family's homes. And it makes me really cross that then they turn around and try to blame us for trying to keep ourselves safe during a pandemic. You know, when those families have been hit really, really hard, we often have, we run a bit of a sort of, not a food bank, but we've got a deal with the local Tesco's who sometimes give us food that's going out of date. And I'll tell you what's sad is that there's never anything left. Our families take everything because they have to. Sorry, it's really emotional. You know, we can't trust this government. We never could. And we can't trust them now either. And really, the thing I'd like to end on is actually what I was saying before about us being educators. Is that's really important because we understand about our children's learning. And one of the things that we've done in my setting to look after those children at home is reclaiming the pedagogy, getting back to talking about how our children learn and what we're going to do to support them. And I think in a way that's the answer to the recovery that we're going to be looking at. Is that educators, we say that we're no longer going to be treated as childcare, we're no longer going to be treated as preparation for school and patronised in that way. We need to reclaim our pedagogical skills. So we're going to run how our early years education works. We're going to reshape it, and we're going to make sure that those children have the best possible start in life. And that means fighting on lots of different fronts and sticking together and doing that. And we will surely do that. We'll make sure that this, you know, that this is an opportunity as well as being a threat. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Lucy. A passionate, inspired speech about the experience you have. I think it raises, you know, your experience raised the issue that in the UK now, 2.3 million children are living with food insecurity. They are worried about where their meals are going to come from. And I'll tell you this, food insecurity, poor housing, the stresses that parents have when they don't know where the next meal will come from really affect the ability of children to develop the skills, you know, preschool and then to learn in school. And we have to really ensure that one of the commitments we try and insist that this government looks at properly is a proper reduction of child poverty, because the level of child poverty in this country now is a national and international disgrace. And on Lucy's impassioned speech, we will finish. So I would like to thank all the speakers who really have stuck to time, but really we've looked at all aspects of the early years challenge here, the early years crisis. I'd like to thank all the everyone who's joined us in this rally online for your contributions in the chat function, and to ask you again, if we're going to raise the profile of the sector, then we have to do these things. Sign the petition, write to your MP and try and get to see your MP using the model letter, and tweet to your MP as well, telling them that early years are vital. Early years are crucial, vital, and very, very important. I will never forget those words from Sally. Crucial, vital, and very, very important. Thank you for being here tonight.